On camera.
Today's July 15th, 2016. We're at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia. My name is Joe Bruckner. I'm a volunteer with the History Center. And with me is Sue Verhoff, who is a senior archivist at the History Center. And we're glad to have with us today Dr. Candy Tate and Mr. Sean Jones. They're with the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, the Atlanta branch of that organization, and we appreciate you coming in today. We're really honored today to have with us Mr. John Wilhelm. Mr. Wilhelm is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps, and he's agreed to come in and talk to us about his military service and about his life in connection with the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. Mr. Wilhelm, we really do appreciate you coming in.
More than welcome.
Thank you. Would you give us your full name and your current address?
Current address?
Yes.
Yeah. John Gorman Wilhelm.
And when were you born?
I was born in Rochester, New York, December 29th, 1938.
Tell us a little bit about your upbringing.
Well, my parents met at Eastman Kodak, and it's a sorry thing to see that great company kind of go under. My dad got a job offer with Rand McNally in Chicago. So I don't remember the move, but before I was 2, we moved to Chicago. And then shortly after, about a year and a half, they bought a house in Oak Park, which is a western suburb of Chicago, and that's pretty much where I grew up.
Did you spend most of your youth or all of your youth in that area?
Yes, I did. I basically grew up there until I went to college. My main travel was, my mother was one of 8, and I had aunts and uncles in Canada, about 90 miles north of Toronto. They all had farms and cattle and chickens and so on. And until I got to Ireland much later in my life, and I've been there, and I said, oh my gosh, these farms look exactly like the farms in Ireland. And that's where the Gorman comes from. My mom was Gorman, so that's my middle name.
So that had to be quite an experience.
It was an experience, and found out that in another great company, Sears Roebuck, that's in trouble now, their catalog had a lot of uses on a farm in Canada where they had outhouses.
Yeah, very practical use.
Very practical, yeah.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I had 2 brothers, one older, one younger, and the baby was a sister.
Okay. And you say you went to college. Where did you go to college?
I went to the University of Michigan.
Okay. Wolverine.
Yep, I sure am, all the way.
When did you go into the military?
I went in directly after graduating from college. My parents were very much middle class, and the idea of going away to school was onerous financially. So I applied for a Naval ROTC scholarship, and unfortunately I found out that I had a septum deviation, so they wouldn't accept me. It's kind of funny that for those Vietnam vets, where if you could stand up and walk, they'd take you. That was a time where they could be very picky. And so I decided I'd enroll, and Michigan had an NROTC program. And so I enrolled there, and I had the septum deviation corrected. But once I got started, then it's too late. They want to give you when you're a freshman. But I did go to NROTC, and I would mention that one of the most influential people in my life is a Marine Major named Arkland, Ezra Arkland. And going to get a little emotional here.
That's okay.
I was going to drop out and enlist. And my mother wanted me to be a lawyer. And I hated it. I wasn't a good athlete, but I wanted to coach. And I talked to him, and he ended up saying, your parents will love you no matter what. You ought to do what you ought to do. I transferred, got straightened out, and finished up. And I owe a big debt of gratitude to him for that. And So it was June of '61. I went to Quantico and again found out that they had much shorter basic school training for officers in Vietnam. But I had 26 weeks, so I was there for 6 months and then got assigned to Camp Pendleton. So when I came back from basic school, went with my dad, got my first car, 1958 Chevrolet, 59, something like that, and drove myself out on Highway 66 to Camp Pendleton. And that's neat. It's pretty much gone now, except little segments, but that was neat.
We'll talk about Camp Pendleton and what kind of adjustment that was for you, and what you learned there, not necessarily militarily, but just socially getting with people from different parts of the country.
Socially, and I would have to say that was, other than when I was at Michigan, the only black person I met was, actually he's a doctor now, he was a varsity basketball player, he was in my dorm, but my suburb was totally white. I had no contact at all. And then I got in the military and I met some people. And one of the finest people, I think I mentioned it to Doctor, was this Corporal Dorsey. And it kind of opened your eyes that there are competent people of all colors and so on. So that was one of the things that was different for me. I liked the discipline. Quick story about how much I respected non-commissioned officers, NCOs. I was on a weekend, in fact, my two big events were on weekend duties. I was a weekend officer on a Saturday, it was in a Saturday, so it was Friday night into Saturday. And PFC Montgomery was trying to commit suicide. What? He was in my unit. So I go down to the shower, and the gunnery sergeant that was on with me, he goes down and here's Montgomery crying. What are you crying about? I lost all my money. You know, they got paid in cash on Friday. He gets in a poker game, loses all of his money. And, what's so funny, it just shocked me. Yeah. He says, the gunny says, look, Montgomery, cutting the razor blade won't do anything. If you want to kill yourself, I'll take the 45 out, just blast you. And he stopped crying. And I just thought, boy, that's tough love.
That is.
But you know, I was all concerned, should we send him to the hospital and all this stuff? And here's a guy straightening me out. So that was one of my...
Well, talk about your military service. I know you served a long time as a Marine, and just go through where you went, what you did, your feelings, anything.
Most of the time, I'd tell you a little bit about, most of my time was in the reserves. So, and there was a couple of things there, but the highlight, I guess, when I came in, I didn't realize this, but when I came in to Camp Pendleton, I was listed as a short timer. By then, they had started requiring officers to re-up for 3 years. You had to sign on for 3. Well, when I got into the NRO, it was only 2. So I got sent to a battalion that was kind of people waiting to get out, people waiting to be transferred to somebody else, was something along that line. And it was kind of, you know, messing around. Then that's when I met Dorsey and Chrysler. Was sent on a project to, I guess they ended up using it in Vietnam, they were testing out a device to detect movement. And I don't know if they ever used it, but I got some pretty good guys, tried to sneak up on them through the tall grass and stuff, and they could tell somebody was moving. And after a while I got, again, they didn't know what to do with me, so they sent me to the 1st Marine Regiment, and I was Assistant Intelligence Officer. And the highlight, I guess, of my active duty was I was duty officer on a Sunday, and I remember his office. The commanding officer was Colonel Sidney B. Altman. And I get a call, you know, hey, Lieutenant, somebody from DC's on the phone. And they said, is Colonel Altman there? And I said, no, sir. It's, do you have his home number? No, sir, I don't. I said, okay, hung up. About 3 hours later, all liberty is canceled. And those of you, I lived in San Clemente, which is about 5 miles off the base. Those of you who go get your gear and come on back. And so I knew something was up. Yeah. And come back in combat gear. And what they then did is they said, you're going to be the 81 millimeter mortar platoon leader. And I had done some of that before, but they were short of, they didn't have a full deal. So the 81 platoon leader was going to be executive officer of a company, and I was going to be in charge of the 81s. I had worked a little bit with them, but I sure wasn't an expert. And so they mount us up in buses, and off we go to El Toro, which is now a subdivision of beautiful homes and stuff. It's all been sold. But El Toro was the main Marine Air base there. And we got there probably about 10 p.m. And they then issued us live ammunition and put us, we sat on the, right off the runway and on with the backs and stuff. And we sat there until 4 a.m. I later found out the reason that this had happened was Kennedy knew that the missiles were being moved into Cuba, and he had sent the order to send a Marine battalion immediately to Guantanamo. And the officer, Scott Air Force Base was where they had all the transports, they were like civilian planes, but they just to get people there. And the colonel who was on duty on a Sunday didn't believe it. He didn't believe the message. I'm pretty sure his career ended, but I don't know that. What they then did is they sent a courier with the locked briefcase to Scott Air Force Base to say, this is not a drill, this is real, send the planes. So somewhere between 4 and 6 a.m., these big, I think they were DC-7s at the time, come in and we load aboard the planes and off we go. We didn't know where we were going. We got aboard the plane, and I don't know if it was Colonel Geffman or whoever said we're going to Guantanamo Bay. And even then we weren't sure just why. We did listen to Kennedy's speech later. Yeah. Heard that after we got there. But I had to set up the pits for the 81 mortars and so on, and that was accomplished. Another thing I remember was at night I would have to go to each pit. I wanted to make sure everybody was on watch and so on. And PFC Lewis was from Chicago, my former home area, and we had a challenge in a password. And I don't know how many people have trouble, but when you're under tension, you're supposed to challenge. So Lewis was giving me the password, whatever it was. And I said, it's Lieutenant Wilhelm, something or other. And then I heard him chamber around. Oh. And I said, expletive Lewis, is that you? Oh, yes, sir. I said, you're telling me the password, not the challenge. And anyhow, he was okay with it. That was one of the lighter moments. What I do remember, and the only thing I felt good about myself, and I think anybody that's been on active duty knows what face the elephant is. And I didn't know if we were going to do it or not. I did know, we had a briefing, there were troops from 38 communist countries on all the high ground around Guantanamo Bay. The bay is a kind of a nice bay. It's got a desalinization tanker out in the middle of the bay, and leeward and windward side. And about the third day that we were there, there was a huge explosion. I think it was on the windward side. It's where the aircraft came in. And it was and we thought, oh, did something happen? Did the artillery, what's going on? And it was one of our planes. It was, I guess, a short runway and misjudged something, and the plane, blew up. So this is one of the things is you have casualties even in peacetime, without that. And on the fourth night, I got a briefing. They're going to have a flare drop. I knew what that was. And so some of the adrenaline was starting to wear off, and so we were determining with my platoon sergeant and who was going to do the watch, because we had to watch, for the entire night. So I said, I'll take the midnight watch. I'll do that. And so I was starting to drowse off, and it was probably 22:30, something like that. And I heard pop, pop, pop. And I still to this day remember my first reaction was, is there shrapnel coming? We had some trees. I didn't hear any shrapnel. And then all of a sudden it dawns on me, oh my God, I forgot to tell my squad leaders. This is, a parachute drop is a flare with a little parachute, and it lights up the whole perimeter. So it's a way of letting the bad guys know we're out there looking, and so on. And so, God, I got 2 or 3 of the squad. Should we open fire, sir? They, no. And so I had to, and I physically went to each of the squads, each of the pits, and said, it's my, I should have told you. There's just a friendly. It's, just to illuminate that. And then the next day, we heard that the Russian ships had stopped. And we actually thought, I think all the Marines that were there thought, well, this is over. And I didn't know until I got back and started reading accounts that there was still some negotiations going on, and it wasn't over. They had just stopped. But during that interim between when it was truly over and when we thought it was over, one of the six spies, a big truck, there were the perimeter. There was a fence, and there were just red clay mud roads, kind of like our red clay here in Georgia. And when it rained, which it did a lot in Cuba, those roads got tricky, and the truck went down the ravine and through the fence and just a little bit outside the deal. Mm-hmm. And there were probably 4 or 5 communists. I don't know what countries they were from. They were around there. They were detaining, the occupants of the truck and the truck. Oh. And I remember the captain of hotel company, a great big guy, freckle-faced big Irishman. And the battalion commander said, I want that truck and those Marines back. And he gets his whole company, 200 men, in a V, going right, and they're just marching. They're all locked and loaded, ready to go. Yeah. that truck came back. That was impressive. I thought that was.
Well, did they ever determine anything about these 5 enemy soldiers? Or what?
No, they took off when they saw and the thing was that probably they weren't didn't know anything more about it, probably less than we did. Yeah. And they were told, don't open fire, don't do anything. But once the truck came through, well, now we're supposed to guard it. But they didn't harm the passengers, so it was kind of cool. The one other thing that I remember was the Commandant of the Marine Corps at the time was a guy named David Shoup. A lot of respect. The top Marine in charge, and I didn't know this, was Brigadier General Collins. And so the commandant comes out. I knew who he was, and so because I was with the supporting fire, like artillery and 81s, we were up there for this briefing. And so he's looking at fields of fire and interlocking and so on. And he says, where's Collins? Get Collins up here. So I'm looking around, where's this corporal or, somebody? Here comes this brigadier general coming up. That's when I realized everybody had somebody
as a boss.
little higher. And he kind of chewed him out about how they should rearrange it. They moved some stuff around up there. But then, once the thing was over, we loaded aboard. That's my only time through the Panama Canal. USS Montrose went through the Panama Canal, and I do remember we leased, it was just overlooking the Pacific Ocean in San Clemente, but the Thorntons, there was a couple, and they had a deal, and they had leased it out to some Marines, and they had a party for us when we came back. They were so pleased. And they were the first ones to say, do you know how close, I didn't know how close we were, because they never fired anything, nothing ever happened. And that's when then they were talking about barbed wire on Florida beaches and stuff, and I said, oh my God, this was this was a big deal.
More serious than you.
Yeah, well, it was more serious. But that was pretty much, that was the highlight. I did, the battalion commander asked me to, if I wanted to re-up and extend it, because they had a thing called transplacement battalions. They were going to go over to Okinawa and spend some time. And the oddest thing that and this is really true, I felt like I was really trained. I was ready to go. And I said, I feel like a coach that's practicing for a contest you'll never play. Little did I know. And and actually I was back in graduate school, and the Chicago Tribune has a picture of First Lieutenant, or Captain John Guy, he made captain, holding a Kalashnikov rifle. He had been sent to Vietnam just with a small group. This was before Gulf of Tonkin and all that stuff. I said, holy cow, that's what he was, the XO of the company when we were down there. I said, wow, how about that? Never dreaming that that whole thing was going to, explode. So, and I guess the other things, and I was in a rifle company. Then I went to University of Illinois for grad school, and I joined this Danville Rifle Company, and then I got a job teaching and coaching back in the Chicago area. And I joined a rifle company in Forest Park. And while I was this was 65, I was in a small little school outside of Danville, Illinois. And I had 9th grade civics, and a couple of these girls came in and they were in tears, and, Mr. Wilhelm, are you going to go to war? What? And so it was right after the Gulf of Tonkin, and the commandant, Shoup, said, well, we have reservists, ready to go. And of course, Johnson made a political decision. He did it twice. He did it once then in 65, and then in 68 in the Tet Offensive. Again, they said we should call the reserves. And both times, and when he didn't call them, I remember this, and she's not here to defend herself, but I think she would say it. I said, I'm trained to do this. I think I should probably volunteer. I should go do this. And my wife said, I'll support you if you're called, but if you volunteer, that's the end of the marriage. And what I'll say in honesty is that if I really wanted to do it, I would have tested that hypothesis. I would have said, I have to go, and if you do what you have to do. But maybe I was just looking for it. I don't know. But I just didn't want to challenge it. But I do know that there were other people, mostly officers, that dropped out of the reserve as soon as they heard there was a possibility. And and I thought that was cowardly, for sure.
Did you ever regret not going?
Yeah. I remember our current Secretary of State, but when he was protesting and stuff, I remember very vividly him before a congressional panel saying, who wants to be the last one to die in Vietnam? And of course, now looking at what we were doing, and they were just nationalists, they weren't communists. 20/20 hindsight, I feel that we haven't had a worthwhile, well, we've had two. We've had Korea after World War II, and we've had Kuwait, going into the first Bush going in. Those were things, and Afghanistan. But some of these other things that we've done, that's just a political thing. But I've often wondered, how would I react But I wanted. I'm glad I wasn't the last person pushing up a rice paddy somewhere. Yeah.
Let me go back to when you were heading to Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
You're on the plane, not knowing exactly what you're going to face, but knowing generally what's going on. What was the mood like among the troops? The conversations you were having?
It was very quiet. It was, you know, there wasn't joking. A lot of times, you know, on exercise, field exercises and stuff, you know, they're joshing around and stuff. I would say it would be pretty quiet. I will tell you one other thing that happened while I was there, and it really kind of put the fear of God into me. The second or third night, Sergeant West, Staff Sergeant West was there, and this Sergeant Gilbert, who was in Sergeant E4, and he had been busted a couple of times. Probably, I don't know for what, but I didn't, you know, read his file. And so you're just coming up with, you're talking, there's nothing to do. So I said to Sergeant West, I said, what would happen if I said that Sergeant Gilbert was consorting with the enemy, was giving him deals, and I wanted you to execute him? Well, sir, I would, are you sure that you want to do that? Then he said, then I'd go back to battalion. So I said, well, the radio is down. Well, there's a landline. I said, oh, somebody's cut the landline, and maybe it was Gilbert that did it. So I just, you know, took all the outs. And he said, well, then I'd shoot him, sir. Yeah. That scared the heck out of me. I said, my God. You know, I mean, there is a chain of command, but, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't know what, I wasn't at My Lai, but I don't think I would do that. Yeah. You know, I mean, I said to myself, I would question, I don't care if it's a general or somebody told me to do something that, you know, just wasn't right. Yeah. But what it got to me was other people will do what they're told. Yeah. And, you know, so that was one of the things. But and the rest of the time in the reserves, I actually, after the 68, it looked like we weren't going to see any action. I was a school teacher and a coach, so I went to, at the time it was Glencoe Naval Air Station, I learned how to manually be an air traffic controller. And at that point, they called them combat air patrols, and they would have bogies, so if an enemy plane was coming, you would direct them how far they were and what direction and so on. And I joined a unit up in Glenview, Illinois, and then when I moved to Georgia Tech had a thing called the Force Service Support Group, and it was beans, bullets, and Band-Aids. And they actually, in Kuwait, they got called up. But by that time, I was retired forcibly, since you either get promoted or you're out. Yeah. And so I had, my 26 years was gone, but I did know that they did go in 1994 to...
How much of that 26 years was active duty?
Just two.
Two, okay.
Two. And I'm being teased by my wife and daughter. Right now I've sent a request that I volunteer a half a day a week at VA. And the fellow I work with, he said, well, you ought to register. I mean, you're eligible and stuff like that. So I sent for, you have to have this form. It's called a DD-214. And I looked through, I've got all my orders from the day, you know, I actually enlisted about 6 months before I got commissioned. And I've got my orders to Quantico, and every order since. I couldn't find a DD-214. So St. Louis keeps all the permanent personnel records, military, for all the services. So I sent a request to send my DD-214 because I can't get registered at the VA. And they send back a kind of a form letter saying, we have no record that you did more than 90 days And in the stuff that they made photocopies of, you can see 2 years. Then I called and I talked to somebody, and he said, I know the person. He said, what they do is, if they don't have it, that's the cover letter, and they'll just make a bunch of records. Oh. You need to, you know, so where I am. But my wife would tell me, well, maybe you never served.
You just imagined that.
It was an imaginary time. So.
Well, you've probably got a unique perspective on this because you were in the reserves for so long. Describe how you saw the individuals who were coming and going into the reserve units over the years, what kind of changes did you see?
Oh, yeah, terrific changes. When shortly after I got in, and of course this was the draft, many of the enlisted men were a lot smarter than me. I mean, they were going to be accountants, lawyers. I don't know about doctors or not, but I mean, they were sharp, and it was a way to avoid. After I don't know when the All-Volunteer Army actually started, but certainly after 74 and 75, you got a more representative class of people. The privates then were, usually high school education and so on. But that period of time from, say, 65, 66 till 73, there were a lot of college graduates and stuff that were privates. And the one nice thing was whenever we went on our 2 weeks active duty, I mean, they bang up. I mean, they could do anything, and they were willing to work. They would do the job and stuff like that, and and I think there was mutual intellectual respect. We knew what they could do, and so we didn't harass them. And that was kind of very few went from the reserves to active duty, both before and after. Usually if they opted to join the reserves first, they weren't interested in active duty. What I don't know is, and I counsel if somebody's still, and I see some vets come in at the VA. I'm at the information desk, and if they said, we just got out, I said, you ought to think about joining the reserves. And of course, some of them, they're through. I mean, they don't want any more. But there are some great benefits, if you stay, and there's a benefit, I think, to the nation too, that they have this experience and so on. I don't know what benefit that I did, other than we were there, the Russians or whoever else was looking, and they said they've got 100,000 people or 300,000 in the reserves. They could mobilize in a hurry if we did something. So
that in itself is probably worth having the reserve.
I think, I think it may be. We don't. How good would they be? I don't know, but I do know that the heard afterwards that the Georgia Tech unit, the core of it was based here in Tech, got kudos for their supply deal, the first Iraq War, when they went into Kuwait and stuff. That they had their act together. They could get things, to the right people in a expeditious manner. So,
Well, talk about what you did outside the military after you got out after 2 years active duty.
Yeah, after I got out, I went to Illinois. One of the major disappointments in my life was, and Doctor, you're graduate student, that a C becomes a B, and if you do anything, and I had 28 hours of A, but I had a professor from Oberlin College who was an English major and I was taking physical education, that was my major, and he wanted me to go into research, and I actually interviewed, and I did a thesis on a device. I did a bunch of high school kids and heart rates and stuff with exercise. And I had 96 or 98 pages of thesis done. And I really wanted to coach. That's what I wanted to do. And he gave me the name of a fellow that was, we were going to go to he wanted somebody to go to the military academies and test the new entries, on their basic fitness and that sort of thing. And it ended up, I would have gone if he had offered me the job, but there was somebody else, a guy with military experience like me, but had done something along this line. So I didn't get that. And then there was a position at the University of Iowa in the kinesiology lab. And I went out to talk to him, and I said, no, I really, and then I got a basketball coaching job. After that, he wasn't interested in whether I ever did the thesis, and I never did. And so I have the one nice thing is I have a love for Illinois, but they're not sending me requests for donations because I'm not an alum. And but I feel badly about that. The other thing that's kind of interesting is after my teary-eyed beginning about being a lawyer and you know, and not really, that wasn't what I wanted to do. I said, I have two kids, a son and a daughter, the boy's the older, and I was, you know, from 7th, 8th grade on, I said, I want to do, you be what you want to be, not what mom and dad want you to, you know, do. And my son was interested, Georgia Tech had a small nuclear thing. He was interested somewhat in that. And I don't know, I think, Chris, I don't know what she was interested in. The upshot of it is they're both lawyers.
Is that right?
They're both lawyers. So, and I said, well, don't do something that, you know. Yeah. And my daughter, especially, who still lives here, says, Dad, would you, you know, do you miss it? And I said, I don't know. I don't know. I will tell you this. I looked at a practice SAT, LSAT rather, not SAT, LSAT. They gave you 5, if you've ever seen one, you have 2 or 3 paragraphs, and then there are 5 things. What's the main thing? I'd always find 3 of them were all main. I mean, I said, they're all important. Yeah. That wasn't it, though. You had to discern what the author was getting at. And I said, I don't think I would have done that. But I do like to argue. And the other thing that would have given me some freedom is that I've never really gotten interested in politics, but I'm very, you know, in terms of running for office or anything. But if you're, you know, if you have that job, or there are certain jobs that are conducive that allow you some time to do that, that probably would have been more what I would have been interested in if I got a law degree, would be to get involved in hopefully doing some good for the community.
Did you stay in coaching?
I did for 6 years. And what I found is, and this is came from, there was a book, and Thomas, I've forgotten the author, really small book, I'm Okay, You're Okay. Yeah. And I don't know if everybody's heard of it, but it talks about rescuers, victims, and persecutors, or something like that. And police, ministry, teaching, social work, those are all rescuers. They're people that are going to want to help. So I got into, when I got into education, I said, well, all of the people here are out for the kids. No, they're out to protect their turf. Now, it's not, they're not there to hurt their kids, but they're much more interested in, you know, if you're the new kid on the block, don't, you know, I've done this, and you know, I'm not going to go into anything, but it ended up as one of my competitors when I was selling here in Georgia. We were talking, and he said, you know, John, you have a confrontational personality. And I said, I guess I don't play well with others, but I don't like to see phonies, and a lot of the administration, that's what I ran into. And you know, so I ended up, now I'll not forget the last, I was coaching at a school that paid the best, but had upper class privileged white kids, and basketball. And we ended up, I think, I looked at they were 2-24, and then I got them, and I looked at the scorebook, and in those 24 losses, there were probably way more than half of them, 10 people from the opponents played in the first half. So the game was over. I was 2-24, but we had any number of, we lost several one-point games and stuff, and we were in the game and so on. We finished the season, and at that time, the state of Illinois only had one category. They had a state championship. Every school started out, didn't matter whether you were big, small, or in between, and if you lost, you were out. But each school got some tickets to the, you know, for the players for the game. And so I remember some of the junior high coaches saying, you think we could get a ticket? And I had gone there to ask them, and I had found out that the most successful coach in our league, where, oddly enough, Hillary Clinton grew up in Park Ridge, he had all of they played his system in the elementary schools. So the kids were familiar with the terminology, what they were supposed to do and stuff like that. I thought it was a great idea. So I went to ask them, and they said, this isn't about, we're not teaching kids a system. It's to have fun and stuff. Well, most kids have fun if they're winning, and if you're teaching them the right things, they're going to learn how to win. But so I listened. Then he asked for tickets. I said, no. I said, the players have the tickets. I then found out, we went to Champaign, which is about 125 miles from the school, and I found out 3 or 4 of the 8 or 9 players that I brought with me sold their tickets and went out, fooled around. So we have a banquet, and I was trying to be, maybe not too cerebral, but it was from who was it? From Shakespeare? Is it Cassius or Cato or something? The fault, dear Caesar, is not in the stars that we are underlings, but in ourselves. Trying to tell the kids, you have to take accountability for
responsibility. Yeah.
And I had forgotten to tell you that. Oops, I'm sorry if I hit that. I forgot to tell you that 3 of them wanted to go skiing over the Christmas holidays. That was the time where you had the best practices. You didn't have class and homework and stuff like that, and we needed the practice. And so I said, no, you can't do that. So I said this, and the principal gets up, and if I had it to do again, I would have walked out. But it was how wonderful the kids were, and he twisted my words around, and it was just kissing up to the parents of these, to me, pampered kids. And so they offered me I could resign or be terminated. And I said, I'm not going to resign because it's got nothing to do with my teaching. It's got, with their coaching. Found out that next year the replacement was from this principal's former high school. It was their sophomore. So, yeah. But that kind of got me into, and then I had a 3-year tour at UPS, and you talk about a square peg in a round hole. I mean, it's a great company to be a customer of. But boy, at that time, it was, if you didn't have a mentor, somebody to kind of guide you along, and most of the people, the promotions came from you drove a truck first or you did something, first. And so I ended up looking in the want ads, and I wanted to do something with sporting goods and stuff like that. And I got a lead on a company, a map and globe company in Chicago. And what was funny was I was thinking it was going to be a Midwest job. And this is what I said, and Joe, I told you earlier, I said, well, what if it's the South? Oh. I said, well, Miami or Atlanta. Any place else, no. And for me, fortunately, it was Atlanta. Now I would change that to just about any place. I have a whole different feeling about it. But that was when you don't know something, you make assumptions that are wrong, but you don't know they're wrong.
That's true.
So
I want to ask you 2 more questions before we finish that I'm just always interested in, regardless of when somebody was in the military. How did your parents feel about you going in the military?
I think they were okay with it. I think it had a lot to do with the possibility of a scholarship. I think that was initially. And then I think that, they were very, I have a treasured picture there with, dress whites. They came out to Camp Pendleton, and I've got a picture with my mom and dad, there. And I think that they were fine, and I never got much. Of course, we got back safely. There was nothing happened, so I never got any worried letters or anything like that from them. But I think that they were okay with it. My dad was not a vet. He, in World War II, he already had 3 children, and he was offered some sort of commission on a Navy ship. He was a chemist, and but he was offered it, but he didn't have to go. And I think he probably had a come to Jesus talk with my mom, who said, "You're not leaving me here with these 3 kids." So I don't think we had, in my family, we didn't have much. My older brother was in the Navy Reserve, but he was a teacher and a principal, and he never, did anything other than the reserve. My younger brother was a doctor, and he was a Navy doctor, and he did go to the Philippines and Westpac and stuff like that. And but he did his 2 years, I think, and then got out. So.
And then one other question. Whether it's World War II or Vietnam or whatever conflict, there's always some point where you're stepping into the unknown. When you got off the plane at Guantanamo and put your feet on the ground and saw what was happening or what wasn't happening, what were your emotions and your feelings?
I think that there was probably still adrenaline. When you've never, this is my imagination, Joe, when you've never faced combat, it's an adventure. It could be exhilarating. I don't know who quoted, there's nothing that focuses your mind when a live round is going by your head. So it wasn't real. In terms of when I got off, I think it was an adventure. What's going to happen next? It wasn't, I might be killed, or I might lose half of my platoon or something. I didn't have those thoughts, and I don't know who would unless you've actually experienced it. And that's why I have utmost respect for people who have seen combat, because I don't know what, I hope I would do the right thing. You're trained to do the right thing, but you don't know what you're going to do until something till the bell sounds, gong goes off. Yeah. So, I think that would be the best that I could tell you, that it was more of just an event. What's going to happen next? Because we had to go across. Right. They had ships to take us ferry across the bay to the other side, and then we marched up to our, where we were going to set up the mortars and stuff.
And I'm going to give you a chance to wrap up, but let's take a second here. Do any of y'all have any questions that you want to ask? Or?
I do.
Sure.
If I may, Joe.
Go ahead.
And this has been very interesting, John, to learn about your experience. And what I was interested in, to go back to Corporal Dorsey and your experience with him, being an African American, and you saying you being in Chicago, that was being in the military was really your first encounters with African Americans. Can you share a little bit more?
Well, I think the big difference is, you think people are different. I mean, it's really no different than I'm thinking Southerners are different, because I'm from the North, or somebody from Maine that sounds different. And I think what struck me was how competent he was. That was what, and I had daily contact for a while. I don't know, it was only 2 or 3 months, because as I said, I was a short timer and they kind of moved me around a little bit, but there was a period of time there where he and Chrysler happened to be a white guy, and they were just both outstanding. And just, both of them counseled, you should be officers, you should go to college, and you should, do that. I did have a little bit of contact with M.C. Burton is his name. He's a doctor now, and he was a varsity basketball player at Michigan. But it was, kind of a hero worship, kind of a big tall guy, and, everybody knew him on campus. So I didn't talk to him. I played euchre with him late at night. He was a good card player. But, one of the things that I say right now, I think a big part of our problem is when we talk about race, whites talk to whites and blacks talk to blacks, and we don't talk to each other. And until we do, and you just have to you just have to have some experience, and it's great. Nothing to do with military, but I spent a week in Malawi, and wasn't afraid at all, but I said, when you're the only one of 2 or 3 white faces among 5,000 people, now I get it. If a black goes to Utah or somebody like that, how they they just have to. Nobody looks like me here, but we stayed in a home for 6 days, and one of the neat things was this family, in order to make both. He was a college teacher. She worked for the State Department of Education. They were both retired, but the pensions were so penurious that they really couldn't afford much. They had a nice home, but that was it. So they had a couple of milk cows, and they had a little fish pond, and they raised fish and so on. And they had excess milk, so they would sell milk to the neighbors. And what the neighbors would do is unpasteurized, but cleanly. They would bring plastic Coke bottles, and she would wash them out, rinse them out, and fill them up with milk, and whatever the currency was that you did. Well, I saw doing it, and one of her nieces was doing it, and so the second day I was there, I said, "Would you mind if I did it?" It was the neatest thing. These young black men would come in, and I'd say, "Have you want the milk?" Or something? They look at me like, "What are you doing here?" It was just fun, and it was hard to engage them. I would have liked to have talked to them, but they were just so flabbergasted. So really with Dorsey, other than trying to encourage him to go to college, there isn't a whole lot of things, and you do have to. You're officer enlisted, so you can't be pals, buddies, or anything like that. So I wasn't there. It was just my opinion of him. And the fact that the two of you are here, it brought back. I said, "Oh God, I remember Dorsey. He was really sharp."
Do you remember his first name?
I don't know why. I cannot remember. It was Frank Chrysler, and I had the two of them together, and I can't remember. I really can't remember his first name. I'm sorry. I wish I could.
But it being the '60s, and knowing what the that's about the time.
Yeah. It would have been '62.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Right.
just kind of the difference. But typically the military was kind of the testing grounds for a lot of
The military was the first, and this is why Staff Sergeant West was black. He was from Chicago, a great guy. And the one thing that I think minorities found is there was much more equality in the military. And you could get promoted, and if you did your job and so on. We took a tour of the Fulton County Jail here recently, and with Sheriff Jackson, and the head of it is a Marine, and we got talking from Semper Fi and stuff like that, and it was just neat. I mean, you could see he had everything set up, and there's no more scandals over there, and he said the Marine Corps straightened me out, and he said I got on the right track and stuff like that. So,
I just had one last question.
Sure.
It isn't race related. This is I'm
Okay.
turning to gender. Because,
Okay.
I heard you talk about your parents meeting at Kodak.
Yeah.
And so if you knew their story, and then I didn't know when you and your wife met.
Oh, yeah. On a blind date.
Oh.
And
So were you in the middle?
no, I was in the reserves, but no.
Okay.
And what I found is growing up in that community, I went back there after graduate school. I was in that area, and I grew up with two twins who lived four houses down, and one was married, and his wife and my future wife were teachers at the same school, and she was trying to fix him up with her husband's brother, her brother-in-law. And he wanted to get his own dates. He didn't want to do it. And actually, he ended up marrying. Glenda has told me since. She said I wasn't statuesque enough. He ended up a tall, very model-looking type of gal. So the second choice was, did I want to go out with her? And so we had what she told me since, very bad first date, it was because she was quiet anyhow, and it was friends, and they were celebrating somebody made detective in the Chicago police force. And so there were 3 or 4, and nobody that she knew. I was brand new. And so she had decided, no more. And so if he calls back, just tell him I'm not home. So I called the next weekend, and her mother wasn't going to say, you tell him, that you're unavailable. And so she was pleasant enough, and I said, have you had dinner yet? And she said, no. And I said, well, you want to go out? And we went out, and all of a sudden, things changed, Unfortunately, the place called Come Back In, and it's closed. But, we used to, every time we went back, we would always go there for a kind of deal. But, that was, that was how we met.
Sean?
I do have one question. Mr. Wilhelm, thank you so much for letting me participate.
Oh, sure.
Your story's been outstanding and absolutely interesting. I appreciate it. You said something that really, really intrigued me, because it's been something that's been debated among politicians and laypersons like myself. You said in 65 and 73, the military had many more men that had college educations. Okay, such is not the case today.
That's right.
Most young men and women going to the military, they do so straight out of high school, and many of them, several friends of mine actually, they don't move on to college after that. Okay, but there's been an issue of, is our younger military in particular educated enough to handle some of the adversities that go into the military? Are they mature enough to be put into these combat situations in Iraq and Iran, Afghanistan? So I found that really intriguing, that there were men there that were college educated, that you said absolutely sharp. And you're a Michigan man, go blue, so you're sharp as well. So you could recognize intelligence, and then you could recognize someone who, could definitely benefit from college education, college experience, and just the many experiences that go into that. So what do you think with respect to what you experienced and then what you encounter now, what you may see in young people now being 22 years old and fresh out of high school, first time out of Chicago, and now he's overseas somewhere?
I think we made this political statement. We've made a mistake with the AllVolunteer Army. I have utmost respect for the people that volunteer, and people like the McCain family, John McCain and so on, his father, grandfather, blah, blah, blah. But it was more egalitarian when I was there. And when I saw that thing with My Lai, with Callie, I said to myself, I don't think this would have ever happened in the early 60s. Because there would have been rebels, and I think I would have been one of them. Wait a minute, what are we killing these people? What are we doing here? And when you start to either draft people, the other shocker to me was, and I don't know how often it happened to Marines. I know it happened to Army. Marines always like to think we're, Joe, we may not be, but we like to think it anyhow, that they were fragging officers in Vietnam. And I'm thinking, I was told, you look out for your men first, they ate first, they did all this for the, why would, well, if you're trying to get promoted or you're trying to win a ribbon or a star, we have to go out on another patrol. That's what I heard afterwards. You had people that were drafted, and they couldn't escape. They didn't have some deferment that more affluent people could get. And now with all the technology and stuff, I have a good friend, and I hope he'll come here. He's a 26-year sergeant major, command sergeant major, but he left and was going to go into computers because he was in tanks and had known something about elevation and how to get the gun to fire and all that. It didn't apply to civilian things, he found. So he was in for 5 or 6 years, and then he got out, and he went back in because the skill set wasn't there. So I don't know if these young enlistees are getting a skill set that's transferable. But, and I know they have the GI Bill. I mean, they could go to school afterwards. But I felt like one of the reasons I got out after 2 years is I'm losing ground. I'm getting too old. It's foolish. you're 23 or 24, you can still go back to school and, be well on your way by the time you're 30. But when all of your contemporaries are starting their careers and you're, still there. So, I would worry that these people would be put into a straitjacket. Here's what you have to learn. We don't care whether it'll go anywhere else or not, whether you can leave or not, whether you could apply it to a civilian deal or not. And I think that's not good. And I think that sometimes the military is the employer of last resort. And I don't, that's not good. That is not good. And we need the doctor's kid and the congressman's kid and the CPA and the law partner firms. We need those kids in there. So I still would like to see a more egalitarian deal where what's the deal about having skin in the game, where there's a little bit more skin in the game for everybody. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Sue, you have anything? Well, I want to give you one more chance to say anything you want to say. Wrap it up, or you don't have to say anything, but if there's something you want to say, a message or anything, just feel free to say it.
Well, no, thanks, Joe. This was interesting. I don't know if I did the right thing or not. I would say to probably my kids that came from the heart. And if you see this before I die and you have any other questions, feel free, because I could go on about some of the other things that happened at. We have an officer boot camp. And I guess that would be, I'm not going to tell you the stories about it. I think I've gone on long enough.
But you're welcome to tell anything you want to tell. This is your chance.
What I will say is that the tough thing about it's called test and training. It's at Quantico. And you're in a college campus and you drill once a week and you go to some classes, for ROTC classes, and you're treated, you're a midshipman, and you start to think, well, I'm a future officer and stuff. Then you get there and you have these buck sergeants, E4s, from Kentucky that's got that twang, and he's ordering you around and stuff like that. And it really, and the whole thing with boot camp is they break you down and then they build you up. Well, we had 6 weeks of TNT, so they only had the last week and a half of building you up. The first 4 weeks and that was the hardest. That was difficult to, I didn't think I was better than anybody, but I thought at least I was as good as most people. And I will tell you the last one. When I got into, this buck sergeant got me into some trouble because I wouldn't do something he wanted to do, which I had a written order. You're supposed to do something. And he said, "Why don't you forget that?" And it was hard when you're not a military family. Was he going to see if I was going to not follow an order and then report me? I mean, I didn't know. So I said, well, sir, I need to swab the deck and stuff. They were going to have an inspection the next day. And so he got me up on the GI can and said I was, trying to harm my whole platoon. I was making them move all of their shoe polish and rifle cleaning gear off, to do this thing. It was unnecessary, but see, I knew everything. And so then 2 days later, they have contemporary ratings. You have to rate who's the worst, who's the best. Guess what? If I wasn't 43 out of 43, I was 42. So I got a meeting with the captain, and how serious was I? Did I really want to do this and that? And I was thinking, yeah, I really did want to do this. We got to the next to the last day before graduation, and they had a competition over 4 platoons, and you had to run the hill course. You did the obstacle course carrying rifle, pack, and then did the ridge course, and it was tough. And so we had a guy from Penn State who was a gymnast. It was the only guy I saw. He could go up an 18-foot rope, never used his legs. He just was so strong in his arms, up he went. He was going to lead our platoon, get up, try and stay up with him, and I would be kicking behind for the laggards. I would stay and help. The last half a mile, Henry Harris, I'll not forget him, I carried his rifle, mine, his helmet, and just got behind him and kept going. He was a smoker. And we finished just second. And the next day, they have graduation. He was our honor platoon. He was the honor guy in our platoon. And who would have thought? But that was probably the toughest part of my Marine training, was that 6 weeks. Yeah. In fact, I will tell you, I remember the second day, you could take a shower. Nobody was hollering at you. That's the one thing. You could go in and take a shower. And I sat under that shower, and I said, I feel like I've been here for 2 months already. Is this ever going to end? And I still remember that I said, I don't think this is ever going to end. It did. So.
Sean, you have a question?
Yes, sir. One more question, because I think what you have to say would just be very valuable to persons who may hear this. You don't often run into a person born and raised in Chicago, well, raised in Chicago like you were. I was raised in Chicago as well, and say you grew up in Oak Park and know Oak Park very well, and you said, I didn't want to go down south unless it was to Miami or Atlanta. That intrigued me. So I just wanted to hear from you, growing up in the 60s, what fear, what assumptions did you make about the South? What assumptions, what fears you may
that's
have
it,
had,
yeah.
you didn't have, you did
Yeah.
have?
That's
I just
good
think you've spoken about being exposed to other persons and how it changed your mindset. You've been in coaching, you know you have to deal with everyone there.
Mm-hmm.
I just think what you have to say about assumptions and assuming things about persons and places would be very valuable.
Well, I think what I thought was a backward. I had seen stuff of the KKK. I really didn't get that tuned in. I didn't realize in my lifetime, Selma. I remember going to Michigan that Viola Liuzzo was shot and killed when she was down here from Detroit. But I guess I'll stay on your question. I don't want to get off on it. Your question was, I thought it was just kind of backward. That there might be a few smart people, but they were basically prejudiced. They were, Jim Crow was, I couldn't understand that. I remember I've seen it many, many times going to the King Center, but the bus burning because they had freedom riders and stuff like that. So and I'm not saying knuckle dragging and stuff. I'm just saying that they were very intolerant. And I wanted to be in a major city if I was down here. I didn't want to be isolated. I didn't think they'd throw a brick through my window, but I didn't know, And, I think that was kind of it. And I was worried about the education because I believe in public education. I went to Catholic school. And one of the things that happened there is not only when I got to Michigan, not only were there a lot of different religions, there were some people that thought the Pope was what? I mean, you're in a ghetto. That's basically, if you just stay one, you need to have some contact with other people. So the deal with the South was, I felt like those two areas were large enough that they would have enough people, a variety of people that I could probably find some to fit in. And I really do feel, even within a year or two after being there and going to Greenville and going to Augusta and stuff, I could have done, any one of those, but I didn't know it at the time. So that was the assumption.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming in here and sharing the stories about your life and particularly about your philosophy. From a military standpoint, I mean, you may not have been exchanging bullets with too many people, but you had the same stress when you landed at Guantanamo. You didn't know what you were going to find. So you served your country. I mean, going down there definitely made a difference, the historians will say. And you stayed in for over 20 years. So you served your country well.
One thing, let me just ask you this. When you went to Vietnam, had you talked to anybody? Had you known any casualties? Okay, that's a whole different thing. See, at Guantanamo, I didn't know anybody that was wounded or something. I think I would have had some sort of reaction that I could have given you. But you know, I didn't have that. It was just all. It was an adventure. So it was. I'd say exhilaration was probably, but it doesn't take long for that to wear off. You know, and I could see that. And fortunately, we didn't get involved in the shooting deal. But
well, we appreciate you going through some of the things you talked about, like your trip to Malawi and the gentleman you met in the service that somewhat changed your attitudes about race, and your answer to Sean's question was, very interesting. I think your kids, grandchildren, or whoever watch this will learn something by hearing what you said.
Hope so.
And I just want to thank you again, and particularly thank you for your service.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you for your service, and thank you for coming, John.
Okay.